Welcome back to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast. I'm your host, Katie Ott, and you are listening to the exclusive podcast of the EAS industry. So we troubleshoot everything equine assisted services. And today we're going to talk specifically about evaluations for participants, mostly as they pertain to adaptive riding participants and, other programming too, but not really therapy services. We have more of our adaptive riding instructor hats on today, right, Edye?
Yes, correct.
All right. I have Edye Godden here with me. Do you want to introduce yourself quick?
Sure. I'm Edye Godden. I am an occupational therapist as well as a certified therapeutic riding instructor and a clinical specialist in hippotherapy. Been in the field for about 34 years, so a long time.
A long time. You've been with HETRA and built us for a long time. You've watched our organization grow.
Yes, I've been very blessed to be part of watching the growth and building a team and seeing everybody really flourish in what they're good at. It's been really cool.
So we're talking about evaluation of participants today, and I have a question. I've never asked you this before. I don't know what it is. What was our evaluation process like in the very beginning of HETRA? How has it evolved?
Oh, that's a good question. So as OT, so Catherine and I would have been the ones doing those initial intakes, and it would have been very much paper and pencil and evaluating kind of what we anticipated the need was based on the participant that we were sitting in front of. Right. So, of course, a lot of times, I know in the early days, the participants would say, we'll just bring our paperwork to the evaluation. And we thought that was just fine and dandy until they don't show up with it. And then you can't put them on the horse, and it just leads to all kinds of other issues too. So that really has changed for us as well. So, but yeah, in the barn, in the front part of the arena, not other people around. So maybe during an off time when we weren't doing other programming, bales of hay as our practice mounts and dismounts kind of thing. So very much different than what we do, but very functional for what we had then.
Right. I think it's important. The reason why I asked about that is because we have grown from a small center to a little bit larger center that we are now. And we're lucky to have occupational therapists that do our evaluations, you being that primary person. So I guess the point I kind of wanted to get across with that is to kind of work with what you have. And as instructors, we should still be completing some kind of an intake process with our participants in order to serve them best, right?
Absolutely. And preferably part of that intake process is in person prior to their first session.
Right. So what do you think are the primary barriers for doing a really good, thorough intake?
I would say there are a lot of barriers. One of them would be space. Like we talked about, we would have to do them in the front part of our arena. Part of it is time. I know, all of us are wearing a lot of hats. Where do we find the extra time to bring in participants to evaluate? I would say resources and knowledge, understanding and comfort, being comfortable with that process.
Right.
Instructors may not be comfortable with what that looks like.
Yeah, I think until you have a list to look at or a form or something like that to help you go off of, it's hard to know exactly what to test or what questions to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that information in front of you at least gives you a guideline. A lot of times I will deviate from that guideline based on what I'm seeing, but at least I have a guideline. And for us, we have some very specific questions that have to be answered for each case.
So depending on what the diagnosis is, you may have a different set of questions or different primary concerns, I guess. So like if I see a paperwork come through that has seizures listed, I'm going to have a whole nother kind of set of concerns and questions that we need to clear up before we move on to programming and that kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
So at HETRA, we do all of our evaluations before their first ride, like you mentioned. Do you want to kind of walk me through a little bit about what that process looks like for us?
So when we get their initial paperwork in, we have our program intake coordinator, she evaluates all of that initial paperwork, makes sure we have the correct signature, all the correct information, and all the correct paperwork.
That's
So,
another time suck. I mean,
yeah.
honestly, we could talk about is just the paperwork management.
Well, yeah, because usually they come in with the registration and release all tidy and done, but
Yeah.
it's the doctor's paperwork that we're reading on. And so whether they have to go in and see the doctor or we're just waiting for the doctor to fax this to us, that oftentimes is the holdup. And
Mhm.
so our program intake coordinator continues to communicate with families and say, we're still missing this or we're missing this piece of your information. We need that before we can schedule your evaluation. So we have all the paperwork in before we schedule that evaluation. And then the first step for us is a history, and we do that on the phone. So I give the family a call at a time they have chosen. We talk through all of the history information that I want to get on that participant. And it really allows us to get more in detail for things that we might need to, and gives us an opportunity to maybe talk about some things that they may not want to talk about in front of their participant.
Right.
But the big help for me is that it doesn't require that participant to sit there and get impatient with the process, so that by the time we're ready to either move to their physical part of the evaluation or to getting on the horse, we're in not a great place because we've really required them to sit in a room in very boring conditions that
It's not the fun part.
no, it's
They're
not
here to
fun.
ride a horse. They're not
Yes.
here to drone on about their, developmental milestones, whatever question we're asking.
Exactly. So I really found that to be much more successful, and I feel like the participants as well as the families appreciate that.
And I think that's a great piece of advice for people, especially from the scheduling perspective too, because you can call and do a 20, 30-minute phone call with a family at a time that works well for them and works well for you. And you don't have to hoof it to the barn or find the space or whatever. And you can kind of get that piece out of the way, because it's very important too to get all that information.
Right. And oftentimes from that information, we really know which direction we're going to be headed with this participant. I've gotten paperwork in before on a participant, and I look at it and I think, oh, I think this participant easily is going to go into our adapted writing program, no issues. And then I've gotten other paperwork in, and I look at it and go, there's lots of stuff happening here. This person's for sure going to go therapy services. And then I see them and it's the exact opposite. So, it's paperwork is great and it's a great starting point, but it doesn't give you the whole picture. And until you have time to get that history and really delve down into what is all happening and what's happening now, that's the way we can really determine where they're going to go. And still sometimes that changes once they come in, but not often. But at the time of evaluation, I do ask the parents what their goals are and what the participants' goals would be. And if they tell me at the get-go, this participant wants to ride independently and has been riding, done trail rides 3 or 4 times a year, goes to a camp every year, then that gives me a better idea of what I'm going to be evaluating when they come in and where their best placement's going to be.
Which ultimately improves participant and family satisfaction, right? Because we're asking those things about their goals and we're listening to what they would like while also considering what we can accommodate as a center, right? But that opens that conversation up so that everybody can feel, I think, heard and successful. So it's part of that too, not just being physically, ready for your participant.
It also gives us really the ability to deal with some of those precautions and contraindications. And if we need to get more information, then we have the opportunity and the time to do that.
Right.
Or if we run into a roadblock where we hit a hard contraindication, we can let the family know then. And again, we don't have that big disappointment that, well, we can't ride today. We might not ever be able to ride based on some information we received.
Exactly. Right. And sometimes that stuff doesn't tease out until you guys have that conversation.
Absolutely.
So then we do the phone kind of history piece, and then they come in for their in-person assessment.
Yes. They come in. Usually that piece of it takes about 45 minutes, and we look at what they look like when they walk in the door, what they look like when we do some just general range of motion. Raise your hands up as high as you can. Put your hands up towards the ceiling, down towards the ground. Can you touch each fingertip with your hand? We look at balance. So can you stand on one foot for a period of time? That affects our ability to get on and off the horse.
Mm-hmm.
We look at sitting balance. So if they come in a wheelchair, can they sit on the side of our mat without losing their balance? How much assistance do they need? How much do they need? Help do they need with transfers?
Mm-hmm.
So we really know if that's something we can accommodate or not. And then we move into the horse part of that. And so that might be on our equicizer if we feel like we're not quite ready to get on a horse. So there might be some resistance there, or we really want to see what the mount and dismount's going to look like first. And sometimes I use the equicizer first, and then we go get on the live equine. A lot of times we will go right on and get on a horse, and we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes on the horse. And that just gives me a really good idea, again, which program, is there going to be any resistance or reluctance to get on the horse? Is there going to be any behavioral issues that we might be facing? Is there going to be any posture and balance things that might be really challenging? And what horse is going to be the best match? What kind of saddle do we need? What kind of volunteer support they need? So that when we go to schedule them, got all that information already gathered.
All the pieces are in place for the most successful first ride that they can have. And that ultimately increases safety and also just regular old enjoyment. Everybody has a much better time when we're feeling comfortable and safe, right?
Absolutely. And I think it allows us to put participants in the correct class or group that really is going to match what their current ability level is. So we don't want to put somebody who is going to be pretty much ready to ride independently in the group that's riding with the leader and 2 sidewalkers, because that's going to not allow them to progress at the pace that they need to. And it's going to make it really difficult for the instructor to do a real cohesive lesson for those participants.
Right. And the evaluation process helps us tease out, like you've mentioned several times, just that they're in the right program. So we have some other opportunities as well. If you decide that writing's not an option, having them come in still for that evaluation might help you decide if you could offer alternative programming.
Absolutely. And we've hit the point where our mounted programming is full, but we bring somebody in, we do that evaluation piece, and we find out, well, we could put them in an equine assisted learning program for a few weeks or for a course and then move them into the riding. Or we could put them in the carriage driving program, or we could put them in a ground-based lesson program, or we could put them in a therapy services ground-based lesson program. So there's a lot of things we can decide and still have them participate, have them here, and then when a horse becomes available, be able to move them into that pretty quickly once we have that happen.
Right. And I think that this whole process obviously benefits the participant. That's number one. We're concerned about their safety and their success in our programming. But it also, do you want to talk about how a good evaluation can impact the other parts of our team and our programming as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from a horse selection standpoint, that's huge. So I might say this participant's going to need a lift mount, and they really are going to be a best fit with a 4 o'clock on Tuesday group. And the volunteer team may say, no, we already have 2 sidewalkers short in that spot. We're not going to be able to find that. Or the horse team may say, no more lift horses available on Tuesday. We got to look at them being in another spot. So it really allows the whole team to really look at where's the best place that we can place them and where's the best place we have the resources in order to meet their needs.
Right. Are you confused about equine assisted learning? Do you want to bring EAL to your center or advance your EAL journey, but you're not sure where to start or how to expand? Do you need support in choosing a certification or support for how to market your current offerings? All of your answers can be found October 24th through the 26th at the inaugural EAL Summit, brought to you by Leadership Adventures. The summit is hosted this year at Healing Strides in the beautiful Roanoke Valley, Virginia during peak foliage season. You'll learn from experienced educators, centers, researchers, and practitioners on how to begin or advance EAL at your center and add programming and revenue streams to support your center's sustainability. In 2.5 days with 24 options for sessions across 3 tracks, all eligible for PATH International CEUs, Hear 4 featured speakers, panel discussions, visit qualified vendors, attend networking receptions, dinner entertainment, clinics, and more. You'll walk away with tons of new EAL ideas, resources, tools, and connections. Join Leadership Adventures at the EAL Summit from October 24th through the 26th to collaborate, innovate, and accelerate your EAL journey. Tickets and all the details are available at www.equineassistedlearning.org and in the show notes. And we do our evaluations, when we do those mounted portions, we kind of sandwich them in between our lessons.
Yes.
So that also gives us kind of an idea, it's kind of backtracking a little bit, but for like you all already talked about all the mounted portion, but then also like what kind of volunteers and what kind of environment we might need too.
Exactly. So if they're an individual that may need a little bit quieter environment, we got to consider that because our 4, 5s and 6 groups are pretty busy,
Right.
and that might not be exactly the right fit for them. So we need to talk about what's their availability.
Right. So we run, if anybody's listening that's a little confused by that, we run our lessons on the hour. So for example, our evening lessons are 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we typically run half-hour sessions. Our bigger groups are 45 minutes, but then we kind of run those evaluations in between so we can utilize those horses and volunteers, but then those mounted assessments are much shorter, obviously.
Yes. And we tried to get them on the half hour. So if I have somebody getting off at 4:30, we try to get on that horse. That horse is potentially not coming back right back into the arena again, and the tack is not needed again. We really try to plan ahead for those things so it works well. And again, we're able to do that. But I could see ways that other programs could do things where, if you have an 8-week program cycle, maybe the week before you start, that's your evaluation week, and you have specific times and you set those up and you have people come in based on the times that you have available. And that might be a way to run that. In order to do that, if you don't have that ability to run it in between your sessions or to bring people in mid-course. So that's one thing we do have the ability to do that I'm not sure everybody does. We can bring participants in mid-course.
Right.
So if they work 5 weeks in, it's okay. We'll still start them in a session as long as it's a good match for them and we have the availability. So there's a lot of different ways I think you can implement. Again, if you just need a quiet space in the barn, maybe it's in, back in the stall area where everybody else is up front and you're able to, bring a small table out there, set it up and write it down and write down your assessment. But I think each person needs to decide and each program needs to decide what is that important information that you need to have in order to have a successful evaluation. And that's why I don't really want to provide our evaluation because that's very much different than what another program might need. And it might make 0 sense to people.
Right.
And we're also looking at things from a therapy standpoint versus from an instructor standpoint.
Right.
But I think it's important to know if you don't have a class that's going to be cohesive, that happens. We have that happen here too. But it's important that the instructor knows then so that they really can plan ahead for that.
Right.
We probably need some additional trained or supportive volunteers that can be helpful and assist with that session so that we ensure success there too.
Absolutely. And I think communicating that with whichever instructor is going to get that participant in their class, communicating whatever way you do that. All of our stuff is digital on Salesforce. And so our instructors can access those evaluations pretty easily. But if that's not what it looks like in your center, just making sure they get that information so that they can, like you said, be very prepared. So like Edye said, as part of this podcast, we are releasing the participant evaluation and EAS webinar. So Edye did a very cohesive and very informative presentation on this at Region 7.
Yep.
Right? Path Region 7 conference. And so we're going to release that digitally on demand. And in that webinar, you're going to get a much deeper look at kind of what we talked about today. But Edye also shares all of the sort of areas,
yes,
I would say, that are in our evaluation versus the specific questions we asked. You sort of just talk about what is important to ask, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So as part of that webinar, there is a handout that's associated with it that has those kind of areas listed on it. So things like, how does this participant communicate? How does this participant do in social situations? Balance, range of motion, some of those things are on there.
Any precautions or contraindications, that's big.
Yeah. So we've got all that stuff listed out, as well as just some general guidelines on what we think makes a really good thorough evaluation for success and how that translates to a variety of different center shapes and sizes.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this is good. I hope everybody goes and checks out that webinar. I will link that in the show notes below. And if you are a member of our Patreon community, you are getting that webinar for free this month. So that is a CEU eligible webinar you can watch anytime you want.
Nice.
All right. Well, thanks, Edye, for sitting down with me. I know you're a busy lady, but I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Love it.
All right. See everyone next time.
That's all for today. But until the next episode launches, scroll down to the show notes and click on the link to get plugged in with us on Facebook, Instagram, or our exclusive educational club at Patreon. This podcast is presented by HETRA University, the educational arm of Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. HETRA University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to the EAS community. Check out all the HETRA University has to offer at www.hetrauniversity.org.